The laundry line stretched across the dusty yard behind the Double Cross Ranch like a white banner of surrender, and Hazel Zimmerman stood beneath it with her sleeves rolled up and her hands raw from lye soap, wondering how one man could possibly go through so many shirts in a single week. She had counted them that morning, 17 of them, all belonging to the same cowboy, all stained with dirt and sweat, and what looked suspiciously like deliberately smudged mud handprints across the backs. The other ranch hands managed to keep their clothing in reasonable condition, wearing the same shirt for days at a time as was customary on a working cattle operation in the New Mexico territory. But this particular cowboy seemed determined to destroy every piece of fabric that touched his skin. Hazel had arrived at the Double Cross Ranch 3 months earlier, in the spring of 1882, after answering an advertisement for a laundress and cook posted in the Hachita General Store. At 21 years old, she had few options available to her after her father's death left her with nothing but debts, and a worn-out homestead that the bank had seized before the earth had settled on his grave. The ranch owner, a gruff widower named Samuel McCreary, had hired her on the spot when she demonstrated her ability to get blood stains out of cotton and promised she could cook something other than beans and hardtack. The pay was modest, but included room and board in a small cabin near the main house, and for the first time in months, Hazel had felt something resembling security. Then she had met Yates Xavier. He had been out on the range during her first week, driving cattle to the northern pastures, and she had managed to complete her duties without incident. But when he returned, dusty and sun-bronzed and grinning like the devil himself, everything had changed. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair that curled at his collar and eyes the color of a summer thunderstorm. When he smiled at her over breakfast that first morning, Hazel had felt her heart perform an acrobatic maneuver that left her breathless and annoyed in equal measure. She had no time for romance. She had work to do, a position to maintain, a future to secure. Cowboys were trouble. Everyone knew that, especially cowboys who looked like they had been carved from granite and sunshine. So she had kept her eyes down, her responses brief, and her distance carefully maintained. Yates Xavier, however, seemed to have other ideas. It started innocently enough. He began appearing at meals more regularly than the other hands, always positioning himself where he could catch her eye. He complimented her cooking with an enthusiasm that seemed excessive for simple fried potatoes and bacon. He offered to carry heavy pots, to fetch water from the well, to help with tasks that no self-respecting cowboy would normally consider. Hazel rebuffed him politely but firmly, and he retreated with good humor, though his eyes held a determination that made her nervous. Then the shirts started arriving. The first week, she had thought nothing of it. Cowboys worked hard, they got dirty, laundry was laundry. But by the second week, she noticed a pattern. Yates brought his shirts to the laundry every other day, sometimes daily, always with an apologetic smile and some explanation about falling in the horse trough, or helping to dig out a stuck wagon, or investigating a possible wolf den. The other cowboys watched this performance with barely concealed amusement, exchanging knowing glances when Yates appeared with yet another bundle of soiled clothing. Now, hanging his 17th shirt of the week on the line, Hazel felt her patience wearing as thin as the elbows on some of the older garments. The May sun beat down on her neck, and sweat trickled between her shoulder blades beneath her simple cotton dress. Her lower back ached from bending over the washing tubs, and her fingers were wrinkled and sore. She had other work to do, bread to bake, vegetables to prepare for supper, mending to complete. She did not have time to wash the same man's shirts over and over again, just because he could not seem to stay clean for more than 4 hours at a stretch. The sound of boots on hard, packed earth made her turn. Yates Xavier approached across the yard, and Hazel felt her jaw tighten in anticipation. He carried something bundled in his arms, and even from a distance, she could see the sheepish expression on his sun-darkened face. "Miss Zimmerman," he said, his voice a warm drawl that made something flutter traitorously in her chest. "I am afraid I have had another mishap." "Another mishap," Hazel repeated, her tone flat. She crossed her arms over her chest and regarded him with undisguised skepticism. "Let me guess, you fell into the creek, or maybe you decided to wrestle a mud puddle. Or perhaps you thought your shirt would make an excellent rag for cleaning the barn." A slow smile spread across his face, transforming his already handsome features into something that should have been illegal in 3 territories. "Actually, I was helping move some of the stock near the eastern fence line, and my horse spooked at a rattlesnake, threw me right into a patch of mesquite. Then I slid down an embankment trying to catch him." Hazel looked at the shirt he held. It was, indeed, covered in dirt, with several torn places where thorns had caught the fabric. She sighed and held out her hand. "Give it here." "I am truly sorry for the extra work," Yates said, but he made no move to hand over the shirt. Instead, he stepped closer, close enough that she could smell the scent of leather and sage that seemed to cling to him. "I know I have been giving you more laundry than the other men." "More than all the other men combined," Hazel corrected. She kept her hand extended, determined not to react to his proximity. "In fact, I calculated it yesterday. You go through more shirts in a week than most of the hands go through in a month." "Is that so?" He seemed genuinely interested, his eyes fixed on her face with an intensity that made her want to step backward. She held her ground. "It is. Which makes me wonder, Mr. Xavier, whether you are perhaps the clumsiest cowboy in New Mexico, or whether there is some other explanation for your inability to keep your clothing clean." The smile widened. "What other explanation could there be?" "I have no idea," Hazel lied. She knew exactly what he was doing, and she was determined not to acknowledge it. "But I would appreciate it if you would make some effort to be more careful. I have other duties besides washing your endless supply of shirts." "I will do my best," Yates promised, finally handing over the soiled garment. His fingers brushed against hers during the exchange, and Hazel jerked her hand back as though burned. He noticed, of course, and his smile took on a satisfied quality that made her want to dump the entire washing tub over his head. Instead, she turned away and marched back to the washing area, where 2 large tubs sat beside a fire that heated water in a massive iron pot. She could feel him watching her, could sense his presence like heat from the afternoon sun. After a long moment, she heard his boots retreat, and she released a breath she had not realized she was holding. The problem was not that Yates Xavier was interested in her. The problem was that Hazel was beginning to realize she was interested right back. Every time he appeared with another ruined shirt, every time he smiled at her over breakfast, every time she heard his voice calling out to the other hands or singing as he worked, something inside her responded in a way that terrified her. She could not afford to fall for a cowboy, not when her entire life depended on maintaining her position at this ranch. Romance led to complications, complications led to mistakes, and mistakes led to ruin. She had watched her mother lose everything when she followed her heart, had seen her father destroyed by loving someone who left. Hazel had sworn she would never make those mistakes, but Yates Xavier was making it very difficult to remember that promise. She scrubbed his shirt with perhaps more force than necessary, attacking the stains with harsh soap and hot water. The fabric was good quality, she noticed, despite her irritation. All his shirts were well made, better than what most cowboys could afford. She wondered about that sometimes, about the small inconsistencies she had noticed. The quality of his boots, the silver conchos on his saddle, the way he carried himself with a confidence that spoke of education and breeding. Most of the hands at the Double Cross were exactly what they appeared to be, hard-working men trying to earn a living in a harsh land. But Yates seemed different somehow, as though he was playing a part rather than living his reality, not that it was any of her business. She wrung out the shirt with violent efficiency and hung it on the line, then turned her attention to the other laundry waiting in the basket. She had learned to identify each man's clothing by sight now, knew which shirts belonged to old Charlie with his missing front tooth, which belonged to Red Stevens with his perpetual sunburn, which belonged to the Mexican vaquero called Louis, who spoke little English but had kind eyes. She washed them all with equal care, mended the tears, replaced buttons, returned them clean and folded to their owners. But she was beginning to dread the sight of Yates Xavier's shirts. That evening, as she prepared supper in the ranch house kitchen, Samuel McCreary appeared in the doorway. He was a man in his mid-50s, weathered by sun and hardship, but fair in his dealings and decent to work for. He watched her work for a moment before clearing his throat. "Miss Zimmerman, I wanted to tell you that the men have been commenting on the improvement in the food and the condition of their clothing. You have done good work here." Hazel felt a warm flush of pride. "Thank you, Mr. McCreary. I am glad to be useful." "I also wanted to ask," he continued, his tone carefully neutral, "whether Yates Xavier has been bothering you." She nearly dropped the pot she was holding. "Bothering me? No, sir. Why would you think that?" McCreary's weathered face creased in something that might have been amusement. "Because that boy has dirtied more shirts in the past month than he did in the entire previous year he worked for me. And I have noticed he tends to bring them to you personally rather than leaving them with the other laundry." "Oh." Hazel busied herself with stirring the pot of beans, trying to hide her confusion. "I had noticed he seems to have a lot of laundry, yes." "Yates is a good man," McCreary said slowly. "One of the best cowboys I have ever employed. He is also the son of a wealthy rancher up in Colorado, working here to prove himself before he takes over his father's operation. He does not need this job, Miss Zimmerman. He chooses to be here." This information settled over Hazel like dust after a windstorm. It explained the quality of his belongings, the education evident in his speech, the confidence in his bearing. It also made his interest in her even more incomprehensible. Why would the son of a wealthy rancher pursue a laundress with nothing to her name but debts and disappointments? "I see," she said carefully. "He is also 24 years old and free to court whoever he chooses," McCreary continued. "But I wanted you to know that I will not tolerate any man on this ranch making you uncomfortable. You have my word on that." "I appreciate that, sir." "But Mr. Xavier has been nothing but respectful. Dirty but respectful." McCreary actually laughed at that, a sound she had rarely heard from the taciturn rancher. "Fair enough. I will leave you to your cooking then." After he left, Hazel stood in the kitchen surrounded by the smells of cooking food and contemplated this new information. Yates Xavier was not just another cowboy passing through, looking for work and adventure before settling down. He was a rancher's son, educated and wealthy, playing at being a working hand while he learned the business. Everything she had assumed about him shifted and reformed into a new pattern, one that made even less sense than before. Why would such a man dirty his shirts deliberately just to see her? The next morning, Hazel woke before dawn as usual and made her way to the kitchen to start breakfast. The ranch came to life slowly around her, roosters crowing, horses nickering in the corrals, the sound of men emerging from the bunkhouse and beginning their morning routines. She fried bacon and eggs, made biscuits, boiled coffee strong enough to strip paint. The hands filed in as the food was ready, taking their places at the long table, and she served them with practiced efficiency. Yates was the last to arrive, his hair still damp from washing, his shirt clean and neatly tucked in. He met her eyes as she poured his coffee, and she saw something there that made her breath catch. Not just attraction, though that was present, but also kindness, genuine warmth, and a vulnerability that seemed at odds with his confident exterior. "Good morning, Miss Zimmerman," he said quietly. "Good morning, Mr. Xavier." "I managed to keep yesterday's shirt clean all night," he offered with a slight smile. "I thought you would want to know." Despite herself, Hazel felt her lips twitch. "That is quite an accomplishment. Perhaps you are learning. Perhaps I had good motivation to be careful." She moved away before she could respond to that, before the fluttering in her chest could translate into words she would regret. But she was aware of him throughout the meal, aware of his presence like a magnetic pull she had to actively resist. After breakfast, she cleared the dishes and began the daily routine of washing up, preparing the midday meal, checking the laundry that needed to be done. She was mixing bread dough when she heard a commotion outside, the sound of raised voices and horses moving quickly. Setting aside her work, she stepped out onto the porch and saw several riders approaching the ranch at speed. McCreary emerged from the barn, and Hazel watched as he spoke briefly with the lead rider before turning to call out orders. The hands assembled quickly, checking weapons, saddling horses. Something was wrong. She could feel it in the sudden tension that gripped the ranch. Yates appeared at her side so suddenly she jumped. "You should go inside and stay there," he said, his voice tight with urgency. "What is happening?" "Rustlers hit the Patterson place last night. Killed 2 of their hands, drove off about 50 head of cattle. They might be headed this way." Fear spiked through her. Rustlers were a constant threat in the territory, men who lived by theft and violence, who thought nothing of killing anyone who stood in their way. "What are you going to do?" "We are going to make sure they do not hit the double cross," Yates said. His hand came up as though to touch her arm, then dropped back to his side. "Please, Hazel, stay inside. Keep the doors locked." It was the first time he had used her given name, and the intimacy of it shocked them both. For a moment they stood frozen, eyes locked, and Hazel felt the world narrow to just the two of them, to the concern in his eyes and the fear in her heart. "Be careful," she whispered. Something blazed in his expression, bright and fierce. "I will come back," he promised. Then he was gone, swinging up onto his horse and riding out with the other men, a cloud of dust marking their passage. Hazel stood on the porch long after they disappeared, her hands clenched in her apron, her heart pounding against her ribs. She had told herself she did not care, that Yates Xavier was nothing to her but an annoyance with dirty shirts. But the thought of him riding into danger made her feel hollow and sick with worry. The day passed with agonizing slowness. Hazel tried to work, to focus on her tasks, but she found herself constantly moving to the windows, searching the horizon for signs of the returning riders. McCreary had left 2 older hands behind to watch the ranch, and they took up positions with rifles, their faces grim. The wife of one of the hands, a sturdy woman named Margaret who sometimes helped with the heavier cleaning, came to sit with Hazel in the kitchen. "They will be fine," Margaret said, though her own hands shook as she peeled potatoes. "Our men know this land. They will not let rustlers get the better of them." "How often does this happen?" Hazel asked. "Often enough. This is hard country and there are hard men in it, but we endure. We always endure." They worked in silence for a while, preparing food that might not be eaten, going through the familiar motions because doing something was better than doing nothing. Hazel shaped bread dough with hands that trembled, her mind conjuring terrible scenarios despite her best efforts to stay calm. It was nearly sunset when she heard the horses. She ran to the porch, shading her eyes against the slanting light, counting the riders as they approached. Relief flooded through her when she saw they were all there, all the men who had ridden out that morning returning intact. They looked exhausted and grim, their faces streaked with dust and sweat, but they were alive. Yates was in the middle of the group, sitting tall in his saddle, his rifle resting across his thighs. When he saw her on the porch, his whole face transformed, the weariness falling away to be replaced by such joy that it took her breath away. He dismounted before his horse had fully stopped and strode toward her, pulling off his gloves. "Did you find them?" Hazel asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "We found their trail, ran them clear to the territorial border. They will not be troubling anyone in this area again." He paused, drinking in the sight of her as though she was water and he had been crossing a desert. "You stayed safe." "I did." "You came back." "I promised I would." They stood there on the porch with the other men moving past them, leading horses to the barn, calling out to Margaret and the other women who had gathered. The world continued around them, but Hazel felt suspended in the moment, caught in the gravity of Yates Xavier's gaze. "Your shirt is filthy," she heard herself say, and he glanced down at himself with a surprised laugh. "So it is. I suppose I will need to bring it to you tomorrow." "I suppose you will." Something shifted between them in that exchange, some acknowledgement that they had both been dancing around. Hazel felt it settle into her bones, the certainty that this man meant something to her, that his safety mattered, that his presence in her life had become important in ways she had not intended to allow. Yates seemed to sense the change as well. He smiled at her, slow and warm and full of promise. "I should help with the horses, but Miss Zimmerman, would you do me the honor of taking a walk with me after supper? Just around the ranch, nowhere improper. I would very much like to talk with you." Hazel knew she should refuse. Knew that accepting would open a door she had been trying to keep closed, but the memory of her fear when he had ridden out, the relief she had felt at his return, the warmth spreading through her chest at his nearness all combined to override her caution. "Yes," she said simply. "I would like that." His smile could have lit the entire territory. "Until after supper, then." He walked away to tend his horse, and Hazel returned to the kitchen in a daze. Margaret gave her a knowing look but said nothing, and together they finished preparing the evening meal. The men ate with the hearty appetite of those who had spent a hard day in the saddle, and Hazel served them automatically, her mind already racing ahead to the promised walk. After the dishes were cleared and the kitchen cleaned, she untied her apron and stepped outside into the gathering dusk. Yates was waiting by the corral fence, leaning against the rails, his face tilted up toward the first stars appearing in the darkening sky. He straightened when he saw her, and she felt that flutter in her chest again, that traitorous response to his presence. They walked in silence at first, following the well-worn path that circled the main ranch buildings. The evening air was cool after the heat of the day, carrying the scent of sage and dust and distant rain. Somewhere in the darkness, a coyote called and another answered. "I spoke with Mr. McCreary," Yates said finally. "He told me he had mentioned my background to you. He did. He wanted me to know that you were not just an ordinary cowboy." "Did that change anything? The way you see me?" Hazel considered the question honestly. "It explained some things. The quality of your belongings, the way you speak, but it also confused me." "How so?" She stopped walking and turned to face him. In the fading light, his features were shadowed but still visible, still arresting. Why would the son of a wealthy rancher dirty his shirts on purpose just to see a laundress? You could have any woman you wanted. Women with money and breeding and prospects. Why pursue someone like me? Yates was quiet for a long moment, his eyes searching her face. When he spoke, his voice was low and serious. When I first came to the Double Cross, I was running away from expectations. My father has a very specific vision of what my life should be, who I should marry, how I should run his ranch when I inherit it. He had actually arranged a marriage for me to the daughter of another rancher, a girl I barely knew. I refused and came here to prove I could make my own decisions, build my own reputation. And, Hazel prompted when he paused, and then I met you. The first morning I sat down to breakfast and you served me eggs and biscuits, and you looked at me like I was just another dusty cowboy, nothing special, nothing remarkable. Do you know how rare that is? To be seen for who you are rather than what you represent. I am sure it is very difficult to be wealthy and handsome, Hazel said dryly, but there was no real bite to her words. He laughed softly. You think I am handsome? I think you know perfectly well that you are, perhaps, but I did not know if you thought so. You have been so determined to keep me at a distance. Hazel sighed and resumed walking. Because I cannot afford to lose myself over a man. My mother did that. She followed her heart and ended up abandoned with a child and no means of support. My father married her out of duty, not love, and they were both miserable. I watched love destroy them both in different ways. I swore I would not make the same mistakes. Love does not have to be destructive, Yates said gently, falling into step beside her. It can also be the thing that makes everything else worthwhile. Easy words from someone who has never had to worry about money or security. You are right. I have been privileged in ways I am only beginning to understand. But Hazel, I am not asking you to throw away your security. I am asking you to give me a chance to prove that I am serious about you. By dirtying your shirts. Despite the seriousness of the conversation, she felt a smile tugging at her lips. It was the only way I could think of to see you regularly without being too forward. Every time I brought you laundry, I got to talk to you, to see your face, to hear your voice. It was worth every deliberately acquired stain. They had completed the circle and were back near the main house. Hazel stopped and looked up at him, this man who had somehow worked his way past her defenses despite her best efforts. What do you want from me, Yates? He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and gently tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. His fingers lingered against her cheek, warm and calloused. I want everything. Your time, your attention, your thoughts, your heart. I want to court you properly, to earn your trust, to prove that I am not going to hurt you or leave you or disappoint you. I want a chance to make you happy. Hazel felt tears prick her eyes, unexpected and unwelcome. No one had ever spoken to her like this, with such raw honesty and vulnerability. And when you go back to Colorado, when you inherit your father's ranch and marry some appropriate woman he has chosen. I will never marry anyone but you, Yates said fiercely. If you will have me. And as for Colorado, I have been thinking about that. My father has 2 ranches, the main one in Colorado and a smaller operation he acquired in a business deal. It is in Texas, near El Paso. He has offered it to me if I can prove I can run it successfully. I could make a life there, a good life, and it would be close enough to here that it would not feel like leaving everything behind. You have thought about this. I have thought about little else for weeks. Hazel, I know this seems sudden. I know you have reasons to be cautious. But I am asking you to take a chance on me. Let me court you. Let me prove myself. And if at the end of it all you decide I am not worth the risk, I will respect that decision. But at least give me the opportunity to try. She should say no. Every practical bone in her body told her to refuse, to protect herself, to maintain the safe distance she had worked so hard to establish. But standing there in the New Mexico twilight with Yates Xavier looking at her like she was something precious and rare, Hazel found she could not quite bring herself to utter the word. "All right," she whispered. "You can court me, but properly, Yates. No more deliberately destroying your clothing. If you want to see me, you can call on me during appropriate times like a gentleman." His smile was incandescent. "I promise to take better care of my shirts, though I have to admit I will miss having an excuse to talk to you every day. I am sure you will find other excuses." "I am absolutely certain I will." They stood there in the growing darkness, and Hazel felt something shift fundamentally in her world. She had spent so long protecting herself, so long keeping everyone at arm's length, that she had forgotten what it felt like to let someone in. It was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. Over the following weeks, Yates proved true to his word. He courted her with a determination and creativity that left her breathless. He brought her wildflowers picked from the range, hardy blooms that survived in the harsh climate. He carved her a set of laundry pins from smooth cottonwood, each one sanded until it was silky to the touch. He helped with tasks around the ranch without being asked, hauling water, chopping wood, repairing the fence around her small garden plot. And he talked to her. Long conversations in the evening after supper, walking the perimeter of the ranch or sitting on the porch steps. He told her about growing up in Colorado, about his mother who had died when he was 12, about his complicated relationship with his father who loved him but could not understand him. She told him about her childhood, about the mother who had left when she was 10, about the father who had tried his best but could never quite overcome his bitterness. They talked about books they had read, places they wanted to see, dreams they harbored. His shirts, Hazel noticed with amusement, stayed remarkably clean. The other ranch hands watched this courtship with varying degrees of interest and approval. Old Charlie muttered that it was about time Yates stopped mooning around like a lovesick calf. Red Stevens bet Lewis $3 that there would be a wedding before Christmas. Even McCreary seemed pleased, though he maintained his gruff exterior. But not everyone was happy about the developing relationship. In early June, a man arrived at the Double Cross Ranch on a fine black horse, dressed in expensive clothing, his bearing radiating wealth and authority. Hazel was hanging laundry when she saw him ride up, saw McCreary come out to greet him, saw the two men shake hands and talk in low voices. Something about the visitor made her uneasy, though she could not have said why. That evening, Yates did not come to supper. Hazel tried not to worry, tried to focus on her work, but she kept glancing at the door, expecting him to appear with his easy smile and warm eyes. When the meal was finished and the hands had dispersed, she finally gave in to her concern and went looking for him. She found him in the barn, sitting on a hay bale, his head in his hands. He looked up when she entered, and the expression on his face made her heart clench. "What happened?" she asked, sitting beside him. "My father is here, the man who arrived this afternoon. He has come to bring me home." Hazel felt cold despite the warmth of the evening. "I see." "No, you do not." Yates turned to her, taking her hands in his. "He says the business deal for the Texas ranch fell through. He says he needs me in Colorado, that I have played at being a cowboy long enough, that it is time for me to accept my responsibilities. He has even informed me that the marriage arrangement is back on, that the other rancher's daughter is waiting for me." "Then you have to go," Hazel said, trying to keep her voice steady even as her world crumbled. "You cannot defy your father forever. Watch me." The fierceness in his voice startled her. "I am not leaving you, Hazel. I am not going back to Colorado to live a life that was planned for me before I was old enough to have a say in it. I am a grown man, not a child to be ordered about. But your family, your inheritance mean nothing if I have to give you up to keep them. He cupped her face in his hands, his eyes blazing with intensity. Do you not understand yet? I love you. I am completely, utterly, hopelessly in love with you. I would give up everything I have, everything I am supposed to be, before I would walk away from you. Hazel felt tears spill down her cheeks. You cannot mean that. I have never meant anything more in my life. Hazel Zimmerman, I love you with everything I am. And if you feel even a fraction of what I feel, please tell me now, because I need to know that I am not alone in this. You are not alone, she whispered. I love you too. I have been trying to protect myself, but it is too late. I love you, Yates. He kissed her then, a gentle, reverent kiss that tasted of salt from her tears and felt like coming home. When they finally pulled apart, they were both shaking. What are we going to do? Hazel asked. We are going to talk to my father together. And we are going to make him understand that I am making my own choices now. The next morning, Yates brought his father to meet Hazel. Yates Xavier was a tall man in his early 50s, with silver-threaded hair and eyes the same stormy gray as his son's. He looked Hazel over with an expression that was not quite hostile but definitely not welcoming. So you are the laundress my son has been writing to me about, he said, his voice clipped and formal. I am, Hazel replied, lifting her chin. She refused to be intimidated, refused to act ashamed of who she was or what she did. My son seems to believe he is in love with you. Your son is standing right here and can speak for himself, Yates interjected. And I do not believe I am in love with her. I know I am. Nathaniel turned his attention to his son. You are throwing away your future for a woman you have known for a few months. Can you not see how foolish that is? What I see is that I have a chance at happiness with someone who loves me for who I am, not what I represent. That does not seem foolish to me. It seems like the smartest decision I have ever made. And what will you live on? How will you support a wife? You have no property, no income beyond what you earn as a hired hand. Do you expect her to continue working as a laundress? If necessary, Hazel said quietly. I am not afraid of hard work. Nathaniel looked at her sharply. And you are willing to live in poverty, to struggle and scrape by, to give up any hope of security or comfort. I grew up in poverty, Hazel said steadily. I know exactly what it entails. And yes, I would rather struggle with Yates than live in comfort without him. Something shifted in Nathaniel's expression, a crack in the stern facade. He studied them both for a long moment, and Hazel saw where Yates had gotten his ability to assess people with a single look. You remind me of someone, Nathaniel said finally, his voice softer. Your stubbornness, your pride, your refusal to back down. Yates's mother was like that. I fell in love with her against my own father's wishes. He thought she was unsuitable, too poor, too uneducated. But I married her anyway, and she gave me the 20 best years of my life before a fever took her from me. Yates's eyes widened. You never told me that. You always made it sound like your marriage was arranged, approved by both families. Eventually, it was approved. But at first, my father threatened to disinherit me, just as I have been threatening you. He came around in the end once he met your mother and saw how happy she made me. I suppose I had forgotten what it was like to fight for love. Nathaniel sighed heavily. I am not ready to give you my blessing. But I am not going to stand in your way either. However, I do have a proposal. What kind of proposal? Yates asked warily. Come to Colorado with me, both of you. Stay for 3 months. Let Hazel meet the rest of the family, see the ranch, experience what that life would be like. If at the end of 3 months you still want to return here and make your life as a hired hand, I will not stop you. But I want you to make that decision with full knowledge of what you are giving up. Yates looked at Hazel, and she saw the question in his eyes. It was her decision as much as his. "I would need to speak with Mr. McCreary," she said slowly. "I have obligations here." "I have already spoken with Sam," Nathaniel said. "He says your job will be waiting for you when you return if that is what you choose." Hazel felt manipulated, as though events were moving too fast for her to keep up. But she also recognized an olive branch when she saw one. Nathaniel Xavier was trying in his own controlling way to make room for her in his son's life. 3 months, she agreed. "But at the end of that time, the decision is ours to make, not yours." "Agreed." Nathaniel extended his hand, and after a moment's hesitation, Hazel shook it. His grip was firm and brief. "We leave in 3 days. That should give you time to prepare." The next 3 days passed in a blur of activity. Hazel packed her few belongings, said goodbye to the people she had worked with, tried to prepare herself mentally for what was to come. Margaret gave her a fierce hug and made her promise to write. McCreary gruffly wished her well, and told her she had more grit than most men he knew. The hands took turns offering advice and teasing Yates mercilessly about being led around by a woman. On the morning of their departure, Hazel stood in front of her small cabin and looked around at the ranch that had been her home for the past few months. She had found safety here, purpose, a reason to keep going. Now she was leaving it all behind to venture into unknown territory with a man she loved but a family she had never met. Yates came to stand beside her, his hand finding hers. "Are you ready?" "No," she admitted, "but I am going anyway." The journey to Colorado took 2 weeks, traveling by stage and train through country that grew progressively more mountainous and green. Nathaniel had arranged for them to have separate rooms at every stop, maintaining propriety even as he gradually warmed to Hazel's presence. She noticed him watching her, assessing her responses to various situations, and she wondered what criteria she was being judged against. Yates stayed close to her throughout the journey, pointing out landmarks, telling her stories about the places they passed through, making sure she was comfortable. His presence was a constant reassurance, an anchor in the midst of upheaval. When they finally arrived at the Xavier Ranch in late June, Hazel stood in the wagon and stared at the sprawling complex of buildings set against a backdrop of pine-covered mountains. It was beautiful and intimidating in equal measure, so different from the harsh desert landscape she had grown accustomed to in New Mexico. The ranch house itself was a 2-story structure built of local stone and timber, with a wide porch that wrapped around 3 sides. Outbuildings dotted the landscape, barns and bunkhouses and storage sheds, all maintained in excellent condition. Cattle grazed in fenced pastures that seemed to stretch for miles, and everywhere Hazel looked she saw signs of wealth and prosperity. "Welcome to Xavier Ranch," Nathaniel said, and there was unmistakable pride in his voice. A woman emerged from the house as they approached, small and slender with graying blonde hair and a kind face. She was followed by a young man who looked to be in his late teens. "My sister-in-law, Catherine, and my nephew, Thomas," Nathaniel introduced them. "They have been helping me manage things since I have been gone. Catherine, Thomas, this is Hazel Zimmerman, the young woman Yates has told us about." Catherine's smile was genuine and warm. "Welcome, my dear. You must be exhausted from your journey. Come inside and I will show you to your room. You can rest and freshen up before supper." Hazel followed Catherine into the house, marveling at the interior despite her best efforts to appear unimpressed. The furnishings were simple but well made, the floors polished wood, the windows large and letting in abundant light. Everything spoke of comfort and permanence, of a family that had lived here for generations. The room she was given was larger than her entire cabin at the Double Cross, with a real bed, a wardrobe, a washstand, and even a small desk by the window. Catherine showed her where fresh water and towels were, then left her alone with a promise that someone would come to fetch her for supper. Hazel sat on the edge of the bed and tried to process everything. This was Yates's world, this place of beauty and prosperity. These were his people, his heritage, his birthright. What could she possibly offer that would compete with all of this? A soft knock on the door interrupted her spiraling thoughts. Yates entered, closing the door behind him but leaving it slightly ajar for propriety. "What do you think?" he asked, sitting beside her on the bed. "I think this is all very overwhelming. It is just a house. Bigger than most, but still just a house. It is more than that, and you know it. This is your family's legacy, Yates. This is what you would be giving up if you choose to stay with me in New Mexico." He took her hand, lacing his fingers through hers. "I already know what I am choosing. These 3 months are not about me deciding whether I want to stay here or go back to you. They are about you deciding whether you can be happy with me, whether you trust that my love is real and lasting. My father understands that, even if he has not said it outright. How can you be so certain?" "Because I know my own heart. Hazel, I could give you all of this, every acre, every building, every head of cattle, and it would not mean as much to me as one smile from you. This ranch will still be here whether I run it or someone else does, but you are irreplaceable." She leaned her head against his shoulder, drawing strength from his certainty. "I am scared, so am I, but we will figure it out together." That evening, Hazel dressed carefully in her best dress, a simple blue cotton that she had made herself, and went down to supper. The dining room could have seated 20 people easily, but tonight there were only 5 of them gathered around one end of the long table. Catherine had prepared a meal that was simple but beautifully presented: roast beef and vegetables from the ranch garden, fresh bread, and berry pie for dessert. The conversation was somewhat strained at first, with everyone carefully avoiding the obvious topic of Yates and Hazel's relationship. But gradually, Thomas began asking Hazel questions about New Mexico, and she found herself describing life at the Double Cross, the landscape, the people, the daily rhythms of work. Catherine asked about her family, and Hazel answered honestly about her difficult childhood, her father's death, her determination to make her own way. Nathaniel mostly listened, but Hazel caught him nodding occasionally, his expression thoughtful. By the end of the meal, the atmosphere had relaxed considerably. Over the following weeks, Hazel settled into a routine at the Xavier Ranch. Catherine insisted she was a guest, not a servant, but Hazel could not sit idle. She began helping with tasks around the house, cooking and cleaning and mending. She discovered that Catherine was lonely, that running a large household without another woman to share the work and conversation was wearing on her. They became friends, spending long afternoons working together and talking about everything from recipes to literature, to the challenges of being women in a man's world. Yates showed her the ranch, taking her riding through the mountain pastures, teaching her about the operation his grandfather had started and his father had expanded. She met the ranch hands, hard-working men who clearly respected Yates and were curious about the woman who had captured his heart. She learned about breeding cattle, managing grazing land, preparing for the harsh mountain winters. And every evening, she and Yates would walk together, sometimes along the creek that ran through the property, sometimes up into the foothills where they could watch the sunset paint the mountains gold and purple. They talked and dreamed and planned, building a future together in words before they attempted to make it reality. But there were challenges as well. In mid-July, the daughter of the neighboring ranch came to call. Her name was Vivian, and she was everything Hazel was not: educated, polished, confident in her place in society. She was also beautiful, with dark hair and green eyes and a figure that made Hazel feel gangly and awkward in comparison. "Yates," Vivian said when she saw him, her voice warm with familiarity. "Your father told me you were back. I have missed you." Hazel watched as Vivian embraced Yates, saw the easy comfort between them, the history that needed no explanation. This was the woman Nathaniel had wanted his son to marry, the appropriate match that would unite two ranching families and consolidate power and wealth. "Vivian, this is Hazel Zimmerman," Yates said, gently extricating himself from the embrace. "Hazel, Vivian Morrison. Our families have been neighbors for 3 generations." "How lovely," Vivian said, giving Hazel a smile that did not quite reach her eyes. "Are you visiting from the city?" "No, I am from New Mexico. I worked at the ranch where Yates was employed." "Oh," Vivian's smile became even more fixed. "How interesting. And you are visiting here now?" "She is here as my guest," Yates said firmly. "Hazel and I are courting." The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Vivian's eyes went cold, and when she looked at Hazel again, there was no pretense of friendliness. "I see. How progressive of you, Yates. Though I am sure your father must have some concerns about such an unusual match." "My father's concerns are his own," Yates replied, his tone taking on an edge. "And my choice of who to court is mine." Vivian stayed for tea, making pointed comments about shared childhood memories and events Hazel knew nothing about. She talked about upcoming social gatherings, about families Hazel had never met, about a world that was completely foreign. By the time she left, Hazel felt exhausted and inadequate. That evening she asked Yates the question that had been burning in her mind all afternoon. "Did you love her, Vivian?" They were sitting by the creek, and Yates picked up a smooth stone, turning it over in his hands before answering. "No, I liked her well enough. We grew up together, and there was always this expectation that we would eventually marry. But I never loved her. I never felt for her even a fraction of what I feel for you. She is beautiful and accomplished and from your world. She is also manipulative and shallow and cares more about social position than genuine connection. Hazel, please do not compare yourself to her. There is no comparison. How can you say that? She knows how to navigate your society, how to be the kind of wife a rancher needs. I do not need that kind of wife. I need you. Someone real, someone who sees me as a person rather than a prize. Someone who makes me want to be better, to work harder, to build something meaningful. Vivian would be perfectly content to live off my father's success and plan dinner parties. You would roll up your sleeves and work beside me to build our own success. Do you not see the difference?" Hazel wanted to believe him, wanted to trust that his love was strong enough to overcome all the practical obstacles. But doubt had taken root, watered by Vivian's obvious disdain and the growing awareness of just how different her world was from his. As the summer progressed, Nathaniel began including Yates and Hazel in discussions about ranch management. He showed them the account books, explained the economics of running a large operation, discussed the challenges and rewards. Hazel listened carefully, asking questions when things were unclear, and gradually she began to understand the scope of what Yates would be inheriting. One evening in early August, Nathaniel invited them to his study. It was a masculine room, full of leather and wood and the smell of tobacco, with maps on the walls and a massive desk covered in papers. "I have been thinking," Nathaniel began without preamble, "about the situation with the Texas ranch. The deal I mentioned fell through because the other party backed out, not because the property was unsound. I still own it, and it still needs someone to run it." Yates leaned forward. "What are you suggesting?" "I am suggesting that I deed it to you. It would be yours outright, not contingent on my approval or anyone else's. It is smaller than this place, about 5,000 acres, but it has good water and decent grazing. It would require work to build it into something profitable, but I believe you have the skills and the determination to do it. Why would you do that? Hazel asked, suspicious of sudden generosity. Nathaniel looked at her with something resembling respect. Because I have been watching you both this summer. I have seen the way you work together, the way you communicate, the way you support each other. I have also seen that my son is not going to be happy living here under my shadow, running a ranch I built. He needs to build his own legacy, and you need to be somewhere you can contribute without feeling like a guest in someone else's home. And what do you get out of this? Yates asked. The satisfaction of knowing my son is happy and successful. And perhaps, eventually, grandchildren who will visit their grandfather occasionally. A small smile tugged at Nathaniel's mouth. I am not a sentimental man, Yates, but I am also not a fool. I can see that Hazel makes you happy in a way you have never been before. And I can see that she is strong enough to be a true partner to you, not just a decorative wife. That is worth more than any business arrangement or social advantage. Hazel felt tears prick her eyes. It was not quite an apology for his initial coldness, but it was close. It was acceptance, offered in the practical way of a man who dealt in land and cattle rather than emotions. I would want Hazel to have legal protection, Yates said slowly. If we marry, I want the property to be in both our names. That is unusual but not impossible. I can have my lawyer draw up papers that ensure she has equal ownership and cannot be left destitute if something happens to you. Then yes, Yates said, looking at Hazel, if you agree. You are asking me to marry you, Hazel asked, her heart pounding. I am. I know we have only known each other a few months, and I know you have every reason to be cautious. But Hazel, I love you. I want to spend my life with you, building something together, facing whatever comes side by side. Will you marry me? The room seemed to hold its breath. Nathaniel sat quietly, watching them, but for once his presence did not feel intrusive. This was her decision, her future, her life. Hazel thought about all the reasons she should say no. The short time they had known each other, the differences in their backgrounds, the challenges they would face. But she also thought about Yates dirtying his shirts just to see her, riding into danger and coming back because he had promised, fighting for their relationship against his father's wishes. She thought about how he made her laugh, how he listened to her opinions, how he saw her as an equal partner rather than a subordinate. Yes, she said, and watched his face transform with joy. Yes, I will marry you. Yates pulled her into his arms, holding her tight, and over his shoulder Hazel saw Nathaniel smile, a genuine expression of happiness that made him look years younger. They were married in September, in a small ceremony at the ranch with Catherine and Thomas and a few close friends as witnesses. Nathaniel walked Hazel down the makeshift aisle, and she felt the emotion in his grip, the silent approval he could not quite voice aloud. Yates stood at the front looking nervous and eager, and when she reached him, he took her hand and held it like he would never let go. The vows were simple but heartfelt, promises to love and honor and support each other through whatever life brought. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Yates kissed her with such tenderness that Hazel felt the last of her defenses crumble. She was his now, and he was hers, and whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. The celebration afterward was modest but joyful. Catherine had prepared a feast, and even Nathaniel relaxed enough to make a toast wishing them happiness and prosperity. As the evening wore on and the guests began to depart, Hazel found herself alone with her new husband on the porch, looking out at the mountains silhouetted against the starlit sky. Happy? Yates asked, his arm around her waist. Terrified, Hazel admitted. But yes, happy. Good. Because we have a lot of work ahead of us. Building a ranch from scratch is not going to be easy. I am not afraid of hard work. I know. It is one of the many things I love about you." They stood there in the comfortable silence of people who no longer needed to fill every moment with words. Then Yates stirred, turning her to face him. "I have something for you, a wedding present." He pulled a small box from his pocket and opened it to reveal a simple gold band with a small turquoise stone. It was my mother's. "My father gave it to me before the ceremony and said she would have wanted you to have it." Hazel felt overwhelmed by the gesture, by the symbolism of being accepted into this family, into this legacy. "It is beautiful." He slipped it onto her finger beside the plain gold band he had placed there during the ceremony. "It suits you. She would have liked you, I think. You have the same stubbornness, the same refusal to be diminished. Tell me about her." So Yates talked about his mother, about her strength and humor, about the way she had run the household and half the ranch, about how much he had loved her and how lost he had felt when she died. Hazel listened, learning about the woman who had shaped the man she loved, feeling a connection across time to someone she would never meet. Later, in the room they would share as husband and wife, Yates held her gently, treating her with a reverence that made her feel cherished and precious. They came together with tenderness and passion, learning each other's bodies, discovering the physical expression of the love they had declared in words. And afterward, lying in his arms with her head on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart, Hazel felt something she had not felt in years: safe. They spent 2 more weeks at the Xavier Ranch, learning everything Nathaniel and his foreman could teach them about ranch management, gathering supplies and equipment, hiring a few experienced hands who were willing to relocate to Texas. Catherine helped Hazel pack, slipping small household items into their baggage with whispered advice about setting up a home. Thomas, who had become a friend, promised to visit once they were settled. When the day came to leave, Nathaniel stood on the porch and watched them load the wagon. At the last moment, he pulled Yates aside for a private conversation, then turned to Hazel. "Take care of my son," he said gruffly, "and let him take care of you. Marriage is a partnership, not a competition. I will remember that, and write to Catherine. She has enjoyed having another woman around, and I think you have enjoyed it as well." "I have. Thank you for giving us this chance." Nathaniel nodded, then did something unexpected. He pulled Hazel into a brief, awkward hug. "Welcome to the family," he murmured, then stepped back quickly as though embarrassed by the display of affection. The journey to Texas took 3 weeks, traveling slowly with the wagon full of supplies and the small herd of cattle Nathaniel had given them as a wedding present. They crossed through Colorado into New Mexico, then east into the Texas Panhandle, following maps and directions Nathaniel had provided. The ranch, when they finally reached it in early October, was both better and worse than Hazel had imagined. The land was beautiful, rolling grassland with scattered cottonwoods marking the path of a creek that ran year-round. The house was a small adobe structure that needed work, but was structurally sound. The outbuildings were in various states of disrepair, and the fences would need to be completely rebuilt. "It is perfect," Yates said, his eyes bright with excitement and challenge. "It is a disaster," Hazel corrected, but she was smiling. "But it is our disaster." They threw themselves into the work with a determination that bordered on obsession. Yates and the hired hands repaired buildings and fences, culled the existing herd and integrated the new cattle, scouted the property for the best grazing areas. Hazel cleaned and organized the house, planted a garden, learned to cook for the crew, kept the books and managed the household accounts. It was exhausting, demanding work that left them both too tired for much conversation by the end of each day. But there was also deep satisfaction in building something from nothing, in seeing tangible results from their efforts, in working toward a shared goal. By spring, the ranch was beginning to take shape. The house had been expanded with 2 additional rooms, the barn was sound, the fences were secure. They had survived their first winter together, huddling close against the cold, learning to rely on each other in new ways. In April, Hazel realized she was pregnant. She had suspected for a few weeks but waited until she was certain before telling Yates. She found him in the barn, repairing a saddle, and stood in the doorway watching him work. He looked up and smiled, that slow, warm expression that still made her heart skip. "You have news," he said, reading her face with the ease of long familiarity. "Good news, I hope. We are going to have a baby." The saddle fell from his hands. He crossed the barn in 3 strides and swept her into his arms, spinning her around despite her laughing protests that he would make her dizzy. "A baby," he kept repeating, wonder and joy mixing in his voice. "We are going to be parents. Are you happy?" Happy does not begin to cover it. "Hazel, you have given me everything. A home, a purpose, and now a family. How could I be anything but ecstatic?" The pregnancy progressed smoothly, and Hazel continued to work as long as she was able. Catherine came to visit in the summer and stayed for a month, helping prepare for the baby's arrival. She and Hazel sewed baby clothes and blankets, stocked the kitchen with preserved foods, prepared the small room that would serve as a nursery. "You have done well," Catherine said one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. "Both of you. This ranch is thriving and you are clearly happy." "We are," Hazel agreed. "It has been harder than I expected, but also more rewarding. I never imagined I could have a life like this." "Nathaniel asks about you in every letter. He tries to sound casual, but I can tell he is proud of what you and Yates have accomplished. He sent money, you know, for the baby. He told Yates it was an investment in the future of the ranch, but we both know it is more than that." Hazel smiled. Nathaniel Xavier was never going to be demonstrative or openly affectionate, but he showed his love in practical ways, through support and resources and gruff advice in his letters. Their son was born in November, a healthy baby with his father's gray eyes and a surprising amount of dark hair. They named him Samuel Nathaniel, after the 2 men who had given Yates his chance to prove himself. Holding her son for the first time, Hazel felt a completeness she had never known, a sense that all the struggles and fears had led her to exactly where she was meant to be. Yates was a devoted father from the start, changing diapers and walking the floor with a fussy baby in the middle of the night, his large hands cradling the tiny body with infinite care. Hazel would wake to find him standing by the cradle, just watching their son sleep, his face soft with wonder. "What are you thinking?" she asked one night, coming to stand beside him. "That I used to dirty my shirts deliberately just to have an excuse to talk to you, and now look at us. We have built a life together, a real life with a home and a ranch and this perfect little person. It seems impossible that all of this came from my clumsy attempts at courtship." "Your very transparent attempts," Hazel reminded him. "I knew what you were doing, did you? And yet you let me keep doing it." "I suppose I did. Maybe part of me wanted an excuse to see you too." He pulled her close, careful not to wake the baby, and kissed her temple. "Best shirts I ever ruined." The years passed in a rhythm of seasons and work and growth. The ranch prospered under their joint management, expanding gradually as they acquired neighboring land and built up their herd. They hired more hands, built a proper bunkhouse, invested in better breeding stock. Samuel was joined by a daughter, Emma. 2 years later, and then another son, James. 3 years after that. The house expanded again to accommodate the growing family. sprouting new rooms and a larger kitchen where Hazel taught her daughter to bake bread and her sons to help with age-appropriate tasks. They faced challenges, of course. Droughts that tested their resources, market downturns that required careful financial management, the constant physical demands of ranch life. But they faced everything together, partners in the truest sense, each contributing their strengths to compensate for the other's weaknesses. Nathaniel visited once a year, staying for a month each time, growing increasingly fond of his grandchildren and grudgingly impressed by what Yates and Hazel had built. Catherine came more often, becoming a second mother to Hazel and a beloved aunt to the children. Even Thomas made the trip twice, the second time bringing his own new wife to meet the extended family. On their 10th anniversary, Yates took Hazel riding out to a spot on the eastern edge of their property where wildflowers bloomed in profusion each spring. They sat on a blanket and looked out over the land they had built together, the cattle grazing peacefully, the ranch buildings visible in the distance, smoke rising from the chimney where one of the hands was keeping an eye on the children. "You ever regret it?" Yates asked. "Marrying a cowboy who could not keep his shirts clean," Hazel laughed, the sound carried away on the warm breeze. "Never, though I have to admit, your laundry habits have improved dramatically over the years. I no longer need an excuse to see you. You are always there. And you are always there. Every morning when I wake up, every evening when I go to sleep, every moment in between. You are my constant, Yates Xavier, the one thing I can always depend on." He pulled her close, and they sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun sink toward the horizon. 10 years since he had started dirtying his shirts to see her. 10 years since she had agreed to let him court her. 10 years since they had promised to love each other for the rest of their lives. It had not always been easy, but it had always been worth it. More years passed. Samuel grew into a tall, serious boy who loved the ranch and showed every sign of following in his father's footsteps. Emma was bright and curious, asking endless questions about everything from cattle breeding to the stars. James was the wild one, constantly getting into trouble, keeping his parents on their toes. When Samuel was 12, Nathaniel arrived for his annual visit and pulled Yates aside for a private conversation. They were gone for over an hour, and when they returned, Nathaniel called a family meeting. "I am getting old," he announced without preamble, "and I am tired of running the Colorado ranch alone. Thomas has his own operation now, and Catherine wants to spend her remaining years traveling rather than managing a household. So I am selling the property." Hazel felt Yates tense beside her, but she reached for his hand and squeezed. They had built their own legacy here. They did not need the Colorado ranch. "I wanted you to know," Nathaniel continued, looking at Yates, "that I am proud of what you have accomplished here. You have built something better than what I built, because you built it with love as the foundation rather than duty or expectation. You chose well when you chose Hazel, and you have created a real home, a real family. That is worth more than any amount of land or cattle." It was perhaps the most openly emotional speech Hazel had ever heard from her father-in-law, and she saw tears in Yates's eyes as he embraced his father. "Thank you," Yates said quietly, "for everything, for letting me go, for supporting us, for being part of our children's lives. You have given me more than I can ever repay. You repay me every day by being happy. That is all a parent can really ask for." Nathaniel spent 2 months with them that year, teaching his grandchildren stories about their heritage, helping with the spring roundup, sitting on the porch in the evenings and watching the stars emerge. When he finally left to begin his new life of travel and leisure, Hazel hugged him tight and thanked him for trusting her with his son. "You earned that trust," Nathaniel replied. "Every day, you continue to earn it. The The children grew and eventually began leaving home. Samuel married a neighboring rancher's daughter and took over management of a section of the property, building his own house a few miles from the main ranch. Emma went to college, shocking everyone, and became a teacher, returning each summer to help on the ranch and fill the house with books and ideas. James proved to have a gift with horses and started a breeding program that gained regional renown. Through it all, Yates and Hazel remained each other's anchor. They aged together, gray creeping into their hair, lines appearing around their eyes and mouths. But the love between them never dimmed. If anything, it deepened, mellowing into something comfortable and enduring, like old leather or well-worn wood. On their 25th anniversary, their children organized a celebration, inviting friends and neighbors from across the region. The ranch had become something of a local institution, known for quality cattle and fair dealing. Yates and Hazel stood together, greeting guests, accepting congratulations, marveling at how far they had come from that day when he had first brought her a deliberately dirtied shirt. Late in the evening, when most of the guests had left and the children were cleaning up, Yates led Hazel out to the porch swing he had built years earlier. They sat together, swaying gently, his arm around her shoulders, her head on his chest. "Do you remember what I said that first night I asked to court you?" Yates asked. "That I wanted everything. Your time, your attention, your thoughts, your heart. I remember. I thought you were impossibly arrogant and impossibly romantic in equal measure. Did I get it? Everything I wanted." Hazel lifted her head to look at him, at the man she had loved for a quarter century, the father of her children, the partner in all her endeavors. "You got it all, and you gave me everything in return. A home, a family, a purpose, a love that has sustained me through every challenge. You gave me a life I never dreamed was possible. I dirty my shirts a lot less than I used to," she laughed. "You do. Though occasionally I miss those days when every deliberately acquired stain was an excuse to see each other, when everything was new and uncertain and exciting." "It is still exciting," Yates said. "Maybe in different ways, but no less real. Every morning I wake up next to you is exciting. Every meal we share, every problem we solve together, every grandchild we welcome into the family. It is all part of the great adventure of loving you." They sat in silence for a while longer, listening to the sounds of the ranch settling for the night, the distant lowing of cattle, the whisper of wind through grass, the soft voices of their children inside the house. This was what they had built, what they had fought for, what they had chosen over easier, safer paths. Years continued to pass. Grandchildren arrived, filling the house with noise and laughter during holidays and summers. The ranch continued to prosper under the combined management of Yates, Hazel, and their children. They became pillars of the community, known for their generosity and wisdom, sought out for advice and support. Nathaniel passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 78, having spent his final years traveling the country and writing long letters to his son and grandchildren. His funeral brought the extended family together, and afterward, Yates and Hazel scattered his ashes in the mountains of Colorado where he had built his legacy. "He was a good man," Yates said, his voice thick with emotion. "Hard and sometimes unforgiving, but good. I wish he could have seen what we have become, what the ranch has become." "He did see it," Hazel reminded him. "He saw it every time he visited, every time he read your letters. He knew, Yates. He was proud of you." On their 40th anniversary, the ranch threw another celebration, even larger than the 25th. Friends came from neighboring counties. Family came from across the country. Emma brought her husband and 3 children. James brought his wife and twin daughters. Samuel brought his ever-growing brood of 5. Standing in the midst of this gathering, Hazel felt overwhelmed by the richness of her life. 40 years since she had stood in a dusty ranch yard in New Mexico, wondering why one cowboy could not keep his shirts clean. 40 years of love and work and building a life together. Yates found her in the crowd, as he always did, and pulled her aside. "Come with me. I have something to show you." He led her to the barn, to a trunk she had never seen before. Inside were carefully folded shirts, old and faded, some with obvious mending. "What is this?" she asked, confused. "The shirts," Yates said with a grin. "The ones I dirtied deliberately. I kept them all these years, could never quite bring myself to throw them away. They were my battle plans, my campaign strategy in winning your heart." Hazel picked up one of the shirts, remembering the day he had brought it to her, claiming he had fallen in a creek. The stains were still visible despite her best efforts all those years ago. "You kept them," she said, her voice soft with wonder. "I kept them because they represent the beginning of everything good in my life. Every dirty shirt was an excuse to see you, to talk to you, to learn who you were. They are artifacts of our courtship, as important to me as any love letter or romantic gesture." She set the shirt down carefully and turned to face her husband of 40 years. He was older now, his hair completely silver, his face weathered by years of sun and wind. But his eyes still held the same warmth, the same love, the same devotion she had seen all those years ago. "I love you," she said simply. "I have loved you since the day I realized what you were doing, even though I tried to deny it. I have loved you through every challenge, every joy, every ordinary moment, and I will love you until the day I die. And I will love you beyond that," Yates replied, pulling her close. "Into whatever comes after, if anything does. You are the best decision I ever made, Hazel Xavier. The best part of my life." They stood together in the barn, surrounded by the evidence of a life well lived, a love well tended. The sounds of celebration drifted in from outside, the laughter of children and grandchildren, the voices of friends and neighbors. But in that moment, it was just the two of them, as it had been in the beginning, as it would be until the end. The years grew gentler after that. Yates and Hazel gradually handed over more of the ranch operations to Samuel and James, content to advise rather than direct. They spent their time with grandchildren, tending the garden, sitting on the porch and watching the world go by. Emma visited often, bringing books and ideas and endless conversation. The ranch continued to thrive, now into its third generation of Xavier management. On a warm spring evening, when Hazel was 71 and Yates was 74, they sat on their porch swing and watched the sun set over the land they had built together. The house was full of family, 3 generations gathered for Easter, and the sounds of dinner preparation drifted out through the open windows. "Regrets?" Yates asked, as he sometimes did. "None," Hazel replied, as she always did. "You? Only that I did not dirty my shirt sooner. We could have had even more years together." She laughed, the sound as bright and clear as it had been 50 years earlier. "I think we have done pretty well with the years we got. We have done more than well. We have built a legacy, Hazel. Not just in land and cattle, but in the people we raised, the lives we touched, the love we shared. That is something that will last long after we are gone. Promise me something," Hazel said suddenly, turning to look at him. "Anything. Promise me that no matter what comes, you will remember that I chose you. Not your money, not your ranch, not your name. You, the cowboy who kept dirtying his shirts just to see me. That is who I fell in love with, and that is who I have loved all these years." Yates took her hand, his grip still strong despite the arthritis that had begun to affect his joints. "I promise. And I promise to remember that you gave me everything I ever wanted and things I did not even know to wish for. You made me whole, Hazel. You made my life mean something." They sat together as darkness fell, surrounded by the evidence of their shared life, confident in the love that had sustained them through 5 decades of marriage. The grandchildren came out eventually, begging for stories, and Yates told them about a young laundress and a cowboy who could not seem to keep his shirts clean, and how that simple beginning had led to everything they saw around them. The children listened, wide-eyed as they always did to their grandfather's stories, and Hazel sat beside him, holding his hand, grateful for every moment, every day, every year they had been given together. They lived to celebrate their 50th anniversary, a golden milestone that brought joy to the entire family. The celebration was smaller this time, just family and the closest friends, but no less meaningful. They renewed their vows under the cottonwood tree where Yates had first told her he loved her, their voices strong despite their age, their hands clasped tight. 50 years, Yates said afterward, wonder in his voice. Half a century of loving you. And I would do it all again, Hazel replied. Every moment, every challenge, every joy, all of it, just to end up here with you. They had a few more good years together, years of watching great-grandchildren being born, of seeing the ranch continue to expand and prosper, of quiet evenings and comfortable silences. Yates's health began to fail eventually, his heart growing weaker, but he remained cheerful and engaged, determined to make the most of whatever time remained. On a cold November evening, surrounded by his wife and children, Yates Xavier passed peacefully from this life into whatever lay beyond. His last words were to Hazel, a whispered "thank you for saying yes," that broke her heart even as it filled it to overflowing. The funeral was held at the ranch, a simple service that celebrated a life well lived and a love that had transformed everyone it touched. They buried him on a hillside overlooking the property he had built, with a view of the house where he had raised his family and the land he had tended for over 50 years. Hazel stood at the grave long after everyone else had left, saying her private goodbye to the man who had changed her life. "You kept your promise," she said quietly. "You came back every time. You loved me, honored me, supported me. You gave me everything you promised and more. Rest well, my love, I will see you again." She lived for 5 more years, surrounded by her children and grandchildren, still sharp and engaged despite her grief. She told stories about Yates, keeping his memory alive, making sure the younger generations understood the depth of the love their family had been built on. She tended his grave, planting wildflowers that bloomed each spring, sitting beside the marker and talking to him as though he could hear. On a warm May morning, in the house they had built together, Hazel Xavier passed quietly in her sleep. Her children found her with a smile on her face, one hand extended as though reaching for someone only she could see. They buried her beside Yates, as she had requested, their graves side by side overlooking the ranch they had created together. The headstones were simple, bearing their names, dates, and a single inscription that Samuel had suggested. She washed every shirt. He dirtied them just to see her. Together they built a legacy of love. The ranch continued under Samuel's management, then his sons, then his grandsons. The story of Yates and Hazel became family legend, told and retold to each new generation. The trunk of deliberately dirtied shirts was preserved, displayed in the ranch house as a reminder of where it all began. And on spring evenings, when the wind whispered through the cottonwoods and the light turned gold across the grassland, people swore they could sometimes see 2 figures walking hand in hand across the property, still together, still in love, still building their legacy one moment at a time. The love story of a laundress and a cowboy, born from dirty shirts and determination, had become eternal,